if you had occasion to be here when the initiative to make prostitution illegal was being put forth, the rancor, the hostility, and just the comments about self-righteous Christians and all that sort of thing they just flooded the internet. And of course, if you were aware, the vote came out something like 83% or something in favor of continuing with legal prostitution. Well, look, whether or not we were being self-righteous as Christians in putting forth this legislation, and regardless of what other kinds of rationalization you could bring to it, there is no way that prostitution can be considered good. God condemns it. It's not what his intent was for the relationship between men and women. That's not how sex is to be employed, if that's the right way to think about it. And sexual sin is one of the ones that was so rife among the cultures where the Israelites were brought into there and told to rub them out because they didn't want that contamination to come into the country. But we can expect to be reviled. We can expect to have hostility expressed verbally, and anymore, that is as difficult as any kind of persecution. No, I take that back. There is much more profound persecution, physical abuse, and so on, like what's happening in Burma these days, or the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or Nigeria, where there's this flashpoint of warfare between the Islamic worldview, people following Islamic worldview, and those who are cultural Christians. And so there's very profound abuse, but it's common to expect, and we should expect to have people revile us. The second thing is that we can expect to have all kinds of evil spoken against us falsely. Once again, the internet is a shining example of how that can take place. Not just us, but every kind of position that's taken can't be trusted anymore. And false statements can be made, and are being made, and will be made about us as Christians that are unfair, untrue. And how are we supposed to deal with this? Do we engage in that verbal sparring that is so common in the comments section of a Facebook posting? I want to suggest to you that I want to leave us with this, that there's a different way to go about submitting ourselves to what's coming our way. And it's found in Peter's first epistle to the people who were experiencing difficulty, who were experiencing persecution. And his letter was to encourage them to remain true. And he said this in 1 Peter 2:19 and following. He said, "For this is a gracious thing, when mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. For what credit is it if, when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? But if when you do good and suffer for it, you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God. For to this you have been called." Can I just repeat that? It's a gracious thing in the sight of God when you do good and suffer for it. For to this you have been called. You're about people having a calling in their lives. Every Christian has a calling. It's the one that Jesus was called to suffer for doing right. And he goes on to say, For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. And when he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to the one who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed, for you were straying like sheep, but have now returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. To this you have been called, my friends, to suffer unjustly for doing good, to not revile in return, to not threaten in return, to submit to the process, to demonstrate that yours is the kingdom of heaven, to have an intimate walk with the Lord, having purpose in your life, called, chosen, selective, honored in the eyes of the Lord, and building up for yourselves a reward in heaven that can't fade away, that will never tarnish, that will last, will be an asset for eternity. These are the things that attend persecution in our lives to the extent that we allow it to have its good and perfect work. Go in peace to love and serve Jesus.